Welcome to Fully Booked, the bookish podcast where I'll chat about all things book and reading related. Whether you're new or a pro reader, there's something for everyone to learn. I'm here to help you on your reading journey and find that next great read that will keep you fully booked. Hello readers, and welcome to episode 16 of Fully Booked. I'm your host Natalie, and today's episode I'll be going over my winter TBR for 2025. Since I plan to talk about a holiday/Xmas TBR, I didn't plan on doing a winter one originally since the holidays do happen in winter, and I felt like it might be too similar. However, I remembered all the books I wanted to read last January to March, and FYI, last day at winter is March 19th next year. And I had an interesting range of books picked out that I felt like I should share with all of you, especially if you're already getting tired of all those holiday romances and need a palate cleanser. And what better way to spend those cold, wintry days or nights than curled up on your favorite chair, couch, or wherever else you read, especially if it snows wherever you are, like where I am in Toronto. And 5 out of 6 books on this list are from my TBR last year, so hopefully I can keep myself accountable to reading them this coming year by posting this episode. But without further ado, let's get into my winter TBR for 2025. But first, I want to talk to you guys about the brand partner of today's episode, Chimney Tea. Now, if you've been following along on my Instagram or listened to last week's episode, then you've already heard me talk about them, but I wanted to bring them up again as I continue to work with them as a partner. And since we are still in this cold season and you might want to brew yourself that nice cup of tea. Now, I want to tell you guys something. So, I used to be a person where I felt like I could not live with caffeine and coffee in particular. And some days were getting so bad in terms of my energy levels that I was drinking up to 3 cups of coffee per day. And so on a daily basis, just to make it through. And honestly, this was not good at all for my body and just physical well-being. It usually, I feel like, affected, my sleep quality depending on how late in the day I was drinking coffee. Not good overall. So I feel like I vowed to myself recently to reduce my caffeine intake, but particularly the caffeine that I'm getting from coffee. And Chimney Tea's oolong tea has been the best replacement for coffee. Not only do I not have, that caffeine crash that I would with coffee, but I'm also getting much better health and other well-being benefits from antioxidants from the tea. But other than that, the tea itself is just delicious. Like, I have not been able to stop drinking their oolong tea ever since I tried it. I've been drinking it on a daily basis to replace my coffee. Like, I would say on average I have 1 cup of coffee a day and 2 cups of Chimney Tea's oolong tea instead. And it's been working so well for me. It also is just a little calming part of my day, getting to brew myself that nice cup of tea to either sit down and get some work done or to do some reading, whatever it may be. But yes, I've just really been loving it. I've especially been loving the Cottage Retreat tea, which I mentioned before already, but just gotta say it again. And they do also have 2 other selections of teas that have a different flavor profile and aroma. So, if you guys are interested in learning more and shopping the whole selection and getting to support a small business, be sure to click the link and use the code in my show notes to get 10% off of your order. And once again, I just want to give another thanks to Chimney Tea for continuing to partner with me, and particularly for today's episode. Now, let's get back to the show. So the first book that I'm going to talk about on this TBR is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. Alaska, 1974. Unpredictable, unforgiving, untamed. For a family in crisis, the ultimate test of survival. Ernst Albright, a former POW, comes home from the Vietnam War a changed and volatile man. When he loses yet another job, he makes an impulsive decision. He will move his family north to Alaska, where they will live off the grid in America's last true frontier. 13-year-old Lenny, a girl coming of age in a tumultuous time, caught in the riptide of her parents' passionate, stormy relationship, dares to hope that a new land will lead to a better future for her family. She is desperate for a place to belong. Her mother, Cora, will do anything and go anywhere for the man she loves, even if it means following him into the unknown. At first, Alaska seems to be the answer to their prayers. In a wild, remote corner of the state, they find a fiercely independent community of strong men and even stronger women. The long sunlit days and the generosity of the locals make up for the Albright's lack of preparation and dwindling resources. But as winter approaches and darkness descends on Alaska, Ernst's fragile mental state deteriorates and the family begins to fracture. Soon the perils outside pale in comparison to threats from within. In their small cabin, covered in snow, blanketed in 18 hours of night, Lenny and her mother learn the terrible truth. They are on their own. In the wild, there is no one to save them but themselves. In this unforgettable portrait of human frailty and resilience, Kristen Hanna reveals the indomitable character, sorry about that, of the modern American pioneer and the spirit of a vanishing Alaska, a place of incomparable beauty and danger. The Great Alone is a daring, beautiful, stay-up-all-night story about love and loss, the fight for survival, and the wilderness that lives in both man and nature. So, as I just mentioned in the intro of this episode, I think the first 5 books on this list are from my TBR last year after getting so many recommendations from booktubers and podcasters. But specifically, this book in particular was one that I kept seeing throughout the entirety of 2024 on the online book community, and especially it was being read by a lot of other booktubers that I happened to watch. And honestly, Kristen Hanna is an author that I've been hearing a lot about for a while. She's just so well known for her women's fiction novels, and I think specifically the way she portrays women and female relationships. So like female friendships, sisterhood, relationship between mother and daughter, or generations of women in a family. And yeah, just overall showcasing those types of close bonds. So yes, I'm very excited to be finally picking up a Kristen Hanna book because, again, I think pretty much all of her books are on my TBR and I'm hoping to get to at some point, and I've just put off reading her books for some reason. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's because they are a little more, mature in theme and like the storyline and the relationships and whatnot. I can't really say, but we're finally going to try and get to this one this coming winter. And of course, the setting of Alaska and being out in the cold on their own in the wild just seemed like a very intriguing premise and fitting, obviously, for a winter TBR. Alright, next up on my winter TBR is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. And before I continue any further, I know this is something that I probably should have clarified a while ago. So, for those of you who haven't been listening to the podcast for that long, or maybe also for some of you who have been around, I just wanted to clarify that in these types of episodes, like TBR or wrap-up episodes, when I say the book title, I immediately just jump into the book summaries to give you guys an idea, obviously, of what the book is about and some of the basic premise. But yeah, for those of you who haven't caught on to that, I'm just clarifying that now because I realized I never preface after I say the book title and the author. I literally just go straight in and start reading, verbatim the description of the book and just telling you guys, and hopefully most of you caught on to that by now. But if you hadn't and you're a little confused sometimes on what I was talking about in these types of episodes, then yeah, that's just to clarify. I literally will just immediately start saying the summary as soon as I say the book title. I just find this a lot easier than also trying to come up with my own summaries of the books. I guess especially for these TBR episodes too, where I haven't read the book yet, it's also a lot easier to just read the book summary because I haven't read the book yet. I guess wrap episodes are a different story, and I've debated, I'm still debating if I should put everything in my own words, but for now, for the sake of things, I just find it a lot easier to just read the descriptions. And FYI, I get all of my book descriptions from Goodreads, if you're wondering, and if you wanted to look them up from yourself, these are all from Goodreads. So that is information that you can also check for yourself. But anyways, okay, with that clarification out of the way, let's actually get into what this book is about. Okay. Calla Fletcher was 2 when her mother took her and fled the Alaskan wild, unable to handle the isolation of the extreme rural lifestyle, leaving behind Calla's father, Ren Fletcher, in the process. Calla never looked back, and at 26, a busy life in Toronto is all she knows. But when her father reaches out to inform her that his days are numbered, Calla knows that it's time to make the long trip back to the remote frontier town where she was born. She braves the roaming wildlife, the odd daylight hours, the exorbitant prices, and even the occasional, dear God, outhouse, all for the chance to connect with her father, a man who, despite his many faults, she can't help but care for. While she struggles to adjust to this new subarctic environment, Jonah, the quiet, brooding, and proud Alaskan pilot who keeps her father's charter plane company operational, can't imagine calling anywhere else home. And he's clearly waiting with one hand on the throttle to fly this city girl back to where she belongs, convinced that she's too pampered to handle the wild. Jonah's probably right, but Calla is determined to prove him wrong. As time passes, she unexpectedly finds herself forming a bond with the burly pilot. As his undercurrent of disapproval dwindles, it's replaced by friendship, or perhaps something deeper. But Calla is not in Alaska to stay, and Jonah will never leave. It would be foolish of her to kindle a romance, to take the same path her parents tried and failed at years ago. It's a simple truth that turns out to be not so simple after all. So, for this one, I didn't have that many reasons for picking it. Of course, this one, yet again, takes place in Alaska, which seems like a perfect setting for a winter-themed book. And I think also the fact that the FMC is from Toronto was intriguing to me. Like, I don't know, it's kind of silly, but there's not that many books about characters from Toronto or even from other parts of Canada, unless the author themselves are Canadian. So, yeah, that stuck out to me as well. But otherwise, yeah, I can't really say there's that much. I think the only other reason I picked this one was because I was under the impression that this was a YA book, and I thought to break up the rest of my TBR, it'd be nice to have one, because I feel like YA books are getting fewer and farther in between in, my TBR and overall reading. As much as I do love some YA romances still, I don't really like them like all the time in my reading now. The only thing is, though, when I looked at this book on Goodreads, actually literally just today as I'm recording this, it's labeled as new adult for the genre categories. So I don't know if like someone was mistaken, because I'm pretty sure I heard another booktuber talking about this book and saying that it was a YA romance. So I'm a little confused now. I think like it's hard because the lines are sometimes a bit blurred between YA and new adult. But then again, I'm wondering, because it also says that the FMC is 26 upon reading the book description right now. So, yeah, okay. Needless to say, I guess I'm a little confused now. But either way, I guess I'm curious to read this book. And actually, hopefully there's not too much spice, because like I said, I was under the impression there would be no spice because I thought it was a YA book, and now I'm seeing that it might be a new adult. So I guess I really will have to read and find out now for this one. Alright, next up on this TBR, we have No Exit by Taylor Adams. A kidnapped little girl locked in a stranger's van. No help for miles. What would you do? On her way to Utah to see her dying mother, college student Darby Thorne gets caught in a fierce blizzard in the mountains of Colorado. With the roads impassable, she's forced to wait out the storm at a remote highway rest stop. Inside are some vending machines, a coffee maker, and 4 complete strangers. Desperate to find a signal to call home, Darby goes back out into the storm and makes a horrifying discovery. In the back of the van parked next to her car, a little girl is locked in an animal crate. Who is the child? Why has she been taken, and how can Darby save her? There is no cell phone reception, no telephone, and no way out. One of her fellow travelers is a kidnapper. But which one? Trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation with a child's life and her own on the line, Darby must find a way to break the girl out of the van and escape. but who can she trust? Now, I'm definitely very excited to read this one because, as you know, if you've been following along and you listened to my, excuse me, I think it was my September wrap-up episode, or at least I read this book back in September. I think it's The Last Word by Taylor Adams was the one that I read back then. And I really enjoyed that one quite a bit. And I do think he's a pretty good thriller author. And I do remember, I think at the time, I actually thought about picking this book up immediately after I had finished The Last Word. But I decided to put it aside at the time, like save it for later, because I feel like I read so many thriller books this past year with like the same sort of premise of being out on the road and being caught in a blizzard and bad weather. One of the people is a kidnapper or killer. You can't trust them. And I think I was just a little bit tired of reading that same premise over and over again in the thriller books that I was picking up. But since I've had a pretty good thriller break, at this point, I haven't picked up a thriller in about a month, I would say, maybe a bit less than. It's been a while. Or for me, where I was picking up thrillers for a couple months at a time, I feel like. This past year, I've had, a good enough break that I'm ready to dive back into, the thriller genre and into this author with Taylor Adams. And I guess just curious to see what he does with this premise that, I've read in other books from other authors and just see, how well it's done. Hey readers, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. And hear me out before you hit skip. I'm so grateful for all my listeners who are with me on this reading journey, and I'd like to ask that if you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review as it helps others find the podcast. Also, please consider supporting the podcast financially as it helps me bring you more exciting content, and you'll get some extras like bonus and subscriber-only episodes, early access to new episodes, and much more. The link to donate will be in the show notes below, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/fullybookedpod. Thank you so much again for choosing to listen to Fully Booked, and now back to the episode. Okay, moving on to Beartown by Friedrich Bachmann. I'm assuming that is how you say his last name, but somebody, please feel free to correct me if I'm saying anything wrong. Actually, whenever I say anything wrong, you guys are always free to correct me and, just let me know on social or, wherever you can reach me. Okay, anyways. People say Beartown is finished. A tiny community nestled deep in the forest, it is slowly losing ground to the ever-encroaching trees. But down by the lake stands an old ice rink, built generations ago by the working men who founded this town. And in that ice rink is the reason people in Beartown believe tomorrow will be better than today. Their junior ice hockey team is about to compete in the national semifinals, and they actually have a shot at winning. All the hopes and dreams of this place now rest on the shoulders of a handful of teenage boys. Being responsible for the hopes of an entire town is a heavy burden, and the semifinal match is the catalyst for a violent act that will leave a young girl traumatized and a town in turmoil. Accusations are made, and like ripples on a pond, they travel through all of Beartown, leaving no resident unaffected. So, I'm just going to preface and say that I feel like beyond what I've seen a couple other booktubers say when talking about this book, besides the fact that it takes place in a small town, there's this whole setup with the hockey team and this hockey match coming up, I don't really know what this story is about. I actually didn't know that there's this so-called violent act that takes place in the town. I feel like maybe I just did not read the description that closely before when I was looking at this book. Obviously, this book is pretty different from the majority of books that I've been picking up recently, especially all the ones I would say that I've covered on the podcast so far, as I really have not been delving as much into literary fiction as I want to. And it's funny because I do actually have a ton of literary, type fiction books saved on my TBR that I know I want to read, but I don't know. I guess it's just bad because a lot of the other types of genres just appeal to me more right now in terms of like fast paced, yeah, like lots of action in the plot. Of course, romance, always appeals to me right now. And it's actually funny. I know I'm kind of rambling and getting off topic, but an interesting story, I guess, is that I feel like these types of kind of literary fiction, kind of, yeah, realistic portrayals of everyday life in books, like these, yeah, just these types of books were very appealing to me when I was in my university years. Like, I remember that I would go to, like, the library on campus, of course, to study, obviously, but I'd also go and actually look at, like, the fictional books that they had available in the library. And yeah, my campus libraries had a pretty good selection of literary fiction books, and I'd always just peruse, usually check out like one or two at a time. And yeah, I just read a lot of those types of books back in that day. I don't know why I was so interested in them at the time, because I feel like besides, yeah, those books that I was checking out from the library, I like did not read at all my university years. That and obviously my required, textbook reading for classes. But other than that, I wasn't doing a lot of reading those years. So I have no clue why these books were so fascinating to me at the time. But yeah, there were a lot of good books that I actually picked up and read in my university years. But for some reason, ever since I've been kind of rediscovering and back on my reading journey since 2022, I haven't picked up as many as I would like to. And of course, Friedrich Bachmann is another literary fiction author that has been highly talked about in the book community. And I think Beartown is the first book that I saw by him. Like, I think I actually remember picking it up like one time when I was at Indigo and I read the back, and it definitely looked interesting to me even at that time. And that was probably a couple of years ago that like I initially picked it up. But yeah, for some reason I've had it on my TBR for years and I've not actually read it. So as I've told you guys before, the podcast is a great form of accountability for me to actually read some of these books that have been on my TBR. So that is what we are doing with this one. And I know that Friedrich Bachmann has a lot of other, I guess, highly acclaimed books. So I'm hoping that I really like Beartown and the style of writing and everything, and that I'll pick up his other books. Because I know that I think A Man Called Ove and Anxious People, those are also two of his highly talked about books, which I believe are already on my TBR for reading in at some point in the future. But yeah, I guess I don't have too much to say other than those ramblings. Yeah, I don't know too much else about the plot or premise of this book. And so far, according to my Goodreads, I've only read technically one book by Friedrich Bachmann, and that was like a Christmas type novella. So it was a very, very short. I think it was honestly more like a short story. I remember it being pretty short, and I read it last year around the holiday season because, again, I wanted, some sort of holiday book to pick up that wasn't just another romance. But anyways, yeah. All those notes aside, I'm excited to be finally picking up Beartown. Alright, the next book on my TBR is In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? When Type A Manhattan lawyer Danny Cohan is asked this question in the most important interview of her career, she has a meticulously crafted answer at the ready. Later, after nailing her interview and accepting her boyfriend's marriage proposal, Danny goes to sleep knowing she's right on track to achieve her 5-year plan. But when she wakes up, she's suddenly in a different apartment with a different ring on her finger and beside a very different man. The television news is on in the background and she can just make out the scrolling date. It's the same night, December 15th, but 2025, 5 years in the future. After a very intense, shocking hour, Danny wakes again at the brink of midnight back in 2020. She can't shake what has happened. It certainly felt much more than merely a dream, but she isn't the kind of person who believes in visions. That nonsense is only charming coming from free-spirited types like her lifelong best friend, Bella. Determined to ignore the odd experience, she files it away in the back of her mind. That is until 4.5 years later, when by chance Danny meets the very same man from her long-ago vision. brimming with joy and heartbreak, In 5 Years is an unforgettable love story that reminds us of the power of loyalty, friendship, and the unpredictable nature of destiny. Okay, I have a confession with this one. I'm pretty sure at first glance I picked this book for my winter TBR literally based on the cover. I don't know if you guys have seen the cover of this book, and it might only be the like US or North American edition because obviously different. I've realized now that different countries, continents have different book covers, but I believe the US book cover, it has this like kind of white, kind of cream background with like this blue pattern. It kind of almost looks like snowflakes, or maybe it's dots or something on it. I don't know, for some reason, it just looked very wintry. And now actually reading the description, I do see that it actually does take place technically in the winter time, I guess, sort of. So yeah, it just felt very appropriate. But looking at this description and thinking about it more, I feel like it's actually a pretty good book to pick up in the winter time, especially with this question of where do you see yourself in X years. It's definitely an appropriate question to ponder on at the start of the year. So this would be a really good one to pick up in January, where obviously, yeah, we're closer to the start of a new year. And I guess this is just a really silly, funny coincidence, but I didn't realize that the future like year in this book is 2025, and I'm going to likely read this book in 2025. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. Again, it's funny because I could have picked up this book at the start of this year, but for some reason I didn't. So now I literally get to read it in 2025. I know that's a pretty silly, coincidence. These are just the things I noticed, guys. I can't explain to you how my mind works sometimes. But other than that, I feel like, yeah, this one intrigued me because obviously there's some sort of love story in here, but there's also other themes touched upon that, yeah, I'm definitely excited to read about. Like, it's not just a romance. Oh, and the fact that I think this premise is one I don't know if I've seen even like in any TV shows or movies. Like, obviously the one of like, oh, the character kind of is wishing something to happen in their life and then they get blasted either back to the past or they get sent into the future for like a certain time and then they go back to the present. Obviously, I've seen that done a number of times in books, TV shows, movies, but yeah, this one where she goes for a brief period of time into the future and then she goes back and then proceeds through real time to like that future time point. Sorry, I feel like I said time and some words quite a few times there. But yes, this type of premise I haven't seen that much. And I don't know, maybe it's not that, revolutionary or anything. But, whenever there's some sort of premise that like, oh, I haven't quite seen that before, I'm always interested to see how the author will play it out, how, the plot and the storyline is going to go. I just got to find out. And I have heard or seen at least Rebecca Searle a little bit like talked about in the book community. I think there's another book that I wanted to read by her that I kept seeing in the bookstores this year, but I haven't bothered picking that one up still yet. Obviously, as well, I think it was called Expiration Dates. It was like another type of kind of love story with some sort of like twist. I can't remember how that one goes. I'd have to look it up. But yes, anyways, at this rate, I will probably be picking this one up first and hopefully I enjoy it. And last but not least, on my winter TBR for 2025, we have Misery by Stephen King. Paul Sheldon. He's a best-selling novelist who has finally met his biggest fan. Her name is Annie Wilkes, and she is more than a rabid reader. She is Paul's nurse, tending his shattered body after an automobile accident. But she is also his captor, keeping him prisoner in her isolated house. Now, I realize that the description for this book is pretty short, but I don't know, unless you've been living under some sort of rock the past couple decades, I'm pretty sure most of you have heard of this book and of course, Stephen King, the author himself. Now, I feel like this is one that while this book description didn't give that much away about the premise and the plot line of this book, there are probably quite a few of you who already have heard or know a lot about Misery, and especially if you've watched the movie, which, FYI, I think Misery is still one of like the top thriller movies that I've watched that freaked me out quite a bit, even the first time that I watched it. I think I've watched it twice in total. Actually, I probably wouldn't mind watching it again because this is one that, even though it was done quite a few years ago at this point, I think maybe came out in like the 90s, maybe earlier, a little earlier, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, for that time, and actually even for now, I feel like it's a pretty scary movie. So actually, even if you don't want to read the book, you should definitely watch that movie. But yeah, obviously this one, from what I remember from watching the movie, it does take place during the winter time because he gets in an accident in like a snowstorm and gets stuck in like this small town, and her house is like in this isolated area, which usually makes sense in these types of thriller stories. But yeah, I guess I really picked this one. Well, like I said, obviously it takes place in winter, so it's appropriate to put on this TBR. But of course, I've wanted to read The King for quite some time, but I've been hesitant because I don't really want to delve into the horror book genre yet. While I did used to enjoy watching horror movies like a couple years ago, I don't really enjoy them anymore. I don't know if I'm just getting even more of a scaredy cat the older and older that I get, but yeah, it's just not something that I like to watch that much anymore. I guess I'll mention briefly that I guess my ex, like who I was with in the past, also liked horror movies quite a bit, so maybe that was why I used to just watch them more. Versus now, my husband, who I'm with, he is also just not very into horror movies and that genre. So yeah, it's not something that I tend to watch nowadays. But Stephen King does have a couple books that are like not horror or fantasy or whatnot. And obviously this is one of them, and it's a more well-known one since it was adapted into a movie. And since I've already seen the movie for this one, the plot and everything just feels a little more familiar. And yeah, it's just like less work, I guess, to dive into this book versus another one that I don't know the plot, the characters, the world at all. Because I know that Stephen King has a lot of books that you can choose from. I believe there's also a pen name that he writes under, if I'm not mistaken. I do not remember his pen name that he writes under. But yeah, with that, I think he's written, honestly, hundreds of novels. But yeah, this one I'm very, very excited to pick up. I hope it's a good start to diving into Stephen King, because there's a lot more recent books that he's written that I know other people have picked up by him. Like I know Fairy Tale seems to have been pretty popular for a book to pick up by him. There's also Holly. Yeah, there's a bunch of other titles that other people in the book community have picked up, but for me, I just decided to go with this one. So hopefully I made the right choice, and I'll want to keep reading and exploring Stephen King. And with that, these are the 6 books on my winter TBR for 2025. Now, I have to say, I feel like I picked a pretty good variety to read this upcoming winter season, just in terms of different genres and themes explored and the storylines, different worlds. Yeah, I'm just very excited to hopefully successfully read all 6 of these books within the winter season, and hopefully this episode inspired you to find some new books to pick up during this upcoming cold winter season. That is, if you live in a very cold climate like I do. And I am very sad to report that as of today, actually before today, I think it was yesterday we got a lot of snow. But today, as I'm recording, is December 5th, and there is hardly snow and slush and all of those things as I look out my window right now. And I'm a little sad because the older I get, the less excited I get to see snow, and particularly the very cold temperatures that we get here in Toronto that comes with the snow and all this weather. But on the bright side, the colder and snowier it gets, the more I will be inside hibernating and getting to read through all of these wintry books. But I do have to comment that if you live in the West Coast, in North America, you are personally very lucky, in my opinion. But anyways, with all that being said, as always, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe and warm wherever you are, and I'll see you back here for episode 17. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you were able to take away something, and be sure to follow the podcast for more bookish content. Until next time, stay fully booked, and I'll talk to you soon.